today's episode of Why I Believe, I confess, I agree with the atheist. Before we get into the content, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and enjoy. Hello, my friend. Welcome to today's episode of Why I Believe. My name is Calvin, and in today's episode, we continue with our discussion with John, who's an atheist and who was asked for evidence, any evidence that God exists. Now, in today's episode, we may shock you because we're actually going to agree with John. And I want to read his response to our latest video, which was episode 2. And I want to read his response in entirety so that we get it in the right context and we don't distort exactly what he's trying to say. But I want to let you know that there is something he said in his response which is so powerful, and I have to admit he's right. Let's dive in. This is John's response to episode 2 on Why I Believe, in which we describe what is God. And again, this was built on the foundation laid in episode 1, which is an hour-long presentation on describing the main arguments in favor for the existence of God. And in summary, in episode 2, essentially I said, hey, science is limited, and we get to a certain point where we need to ditch and abandon natural science because it can only get us so far. And at that point, we then use logic and reason, especially philosophy, and we looked at the ontological argument in favor for the existence of God. And this is what John says in his response. Your question to me was, is science limited? My answer to that is yes, you're right. Science is limited to the study of the natural world. Why? Because the natural world is all that's observable or demonstrable. Nothing else outside of that is observable or demonstrable. Or to put it another way, anything that is not observable by any means known to man is exactly the same as that which does not exist. Very interesting. So John says that anything that is not observable by any means known to man is exactly the same as that which does not exist. I want you to take some time and think about that statement. So John is essentially saying that if it's not observable, if it's not demonstrable, if anything that is not observable by any means known to man is exactly the same as that which does not exist. Think about that, friends. Do you see the error in that? Do you see the fallacy in that logic? That because you and I do not know it, we cannot demonstrate it, we cannot observe it, then to you and I, it does not exist. Okay. God and the supernatural are not observable or demonstrable. Okay, I disagree with this, but I'm going to present John's arguments. I want to put it in his context. Then you talk about logic. Logic meaning reasoning, conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. So please validate, prove or confirm that it is true or correct that your God exists. That is all I'm asking from you. Remember, I did not ask for any scientific evidence as you claimed I did. I ask for evidence. Again, so John is asking for evidence and he's saying that it doesn't have to be scientific. All right, let's read on. Just because you say you can conceive of a God. So John is responding now to this ontological argument, which is because, and in philosophy, René Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. So he's saying essentially because you think of something that exists doesn't mean it exists or it's true. Just because you can conceive of a God doesn't mean there is a God. I can conceive of a magical pixie and the end of the universe that created everything. Does that make the magical pixie and the end of the universe real? Good points, right? You talk about believing in God because it's logical. Once it seemed 100% logical that the sun orbited the earth. It was bleeding obvious. But of course now, thanks to science, we know that that was not true. We once thought that organic life was so complicated that a God must have designed it. And then along came Darwin, and now we know that the natural evolution of species is a much better explanation and also has overwhelming evidence to prove it. All right. I did not say because we can't prove it, therefore it doesn't exist. And again, this is referring to my video in minute 13 and 20 seconds. That was not my argument or anything like it. I made it perfectly clear that a God could exist. Wow. Wow. So this is, for me, progress. And I love this because, again, I'm speaking as though John is an atheist who does not exist in the possibility of God. But here, John is correcting me and letting me know that he's more agnostic, that here, there could be a possibility of a God. This is wonderful. John is letting me know that he made it perfectly clear that a God could exist. All right, no arguments there. We rest our case. I love this. I'm going to be generous here and believe you just misread my comment and are not lying like the vast majority of the Christian apologists do. Okay, so this is clear. So John, I am not lying. If you did make it clear, then I misunderstood your comment. Okay, so very good. My friend, I don't mean to be rude here, but I see it that you are totally convinced that your God exists first. Now, this is the clincher, friends, and this is the target of our video today. John makes this point, and I have to agree with him 100%. And I'm going to read his comment again. John says, my friend, I don't mean to be rude here, but as I see it, you are totally convinced that your God exists first. Now, friends, we are going to stay here for a little bit because this is the clincher. Why I believe, in order to believe in God, and this is what the Bible tells us as well, we must first believe that God exists. Then we can perhaps prove his existence if we need to. But yes, John, you are 100% correct because I believe that God exists first. Then I go on to prove everything else. Why? Because faith, it all starts with faith. It all starts with belief. If I start from doubt and I look for doubt, I will find doubt. I'm going to elaborate and unpack that a bit more later on. But yes, I agree with John that I am starting from the premise that God exists. All right? And then he goes on to say, and then with that unverified premise in your head, you go on to try to bolster your own belief and try to convince others as well with all sorts of claims about your God that have no real validity or evidence whatsoever. Again, we disagree on that completely because, again, that's subjective in terms of what he defines as real evidence of validity. Only you can choose to start looking outside of your religious box. But I'm well aware how difficult that can be. So I won't trouble you again, my friend, but I just had to respond to this. All the very best, yours and truly, my friend, and goodbye, John. So I love this. I love this because I am getting a better understanding of John's stance. And I appreciate John. Thank you so much for responding. And we're doing this back and forth because in large part, John has not agreed to come on a Zoom. I have asked him, invited him to get on a Zoom and have a discussion one-on-one. We could record it or we don't have to. But I would love to have a discussion with him because if you recognize his entire response was describing flaws in my argument and describing issues with my stance. I get that. But yet he has not addressed the main idea that I've pointed out in my video. And the main idea is this. How do atheists and agnostics account for the origin of the universe, especially when we look at science, which takes us back to the point of the Big Bang, right? According to modern science. What happened before this? Where did these organic molecules, which science claims developed into a Big Bang, how did life come from non-life? Nuts and bolts of this entire thing is, when you take human existence back to the beginning, it all starts in Genesis, back to the beginning, from inception. Science cannot explain what happened to create life from the beginning. So then we use logic. And logic tells us, and if you go back to my video and I break down what is God, logic tells us that the only thing that can start something from nothing is something that has existed forever, something that is outside of space and time. The only thing that can create or cause space and time is something which exists outside space and time. In other words, the cause, which is God, has to be greater than the effect. Logic and reason tells us that is the only logical understanding or explanation. It is. There is no way around it. And what you realize is that John has not addressed that one premise. And the premise is that time and space was created. We know that the universe was created. Therefore, whatever created it has to be greater than it, because the universe is an effect. It is not a cause. That's it. And John still has not addressed that one question. Again, we cannot use science to explain that. We use logic. And when we get to that point of using logic, it boils down to faith, because we cannot prove it, we cannot test it, we cannot observe it because we were not there. It tells us to believe because God says we should believe. Therefore, this is why I start from the point of belief, because I wasn't there at the beginning. None of us will. And it all boils down to faith. Friends, this is why I believe, because logic tells me that the only rational, logical explanation is of a being who pre-existed time and space. This is why I believe. I hope you got value from today's episode. It's pretty clear in my mind. Love to hear from you. Until next time, bye for now and God bless. If you haven't yet, please like this video, subscribe to this channel. I'll talk to you soon.